A very good afternoon, everybody. Today we have a student's introductory presentation on the final text in contemporary literature. And this is written by Julian Barnes. And the title of the novel is The Only Story, written by Julian Barnes. Now, we have seen up till now in this journey of studying contemporary English literature that in one text we have studied where the setting, the background or the setting was around Varanasi, or let us say from Varanasi to Kota, but some part of central India only, not much of geographical locations are changing in one novel that we have studied. In another novel, we have studied that by and large, pan India is covered geographically from central India to Kashmir, that is North India, down south and western part of India, Gujarat. So there was a large geographical covering of that. But India, pan India was covered up in another novel. In the third novel, we have seen that it goes beyond India, beyond continents, and around 3 continents are covered as the geographical locations. And along with the geographical locations, these all novels were also having a kind of a wide range of dealing with the topics, subjects which are of grave concern in our time also, in today's time also. All these concerns are very vital to be understood with proper critical insights there. So we had India, then we had Italy, that is Europe, and then we had America, Brooklyn, Los Angeles also in the last novel that we have studied. Now this novel, from that angle, when you take a look at this novel, we find that this novel is rather a self-exploration. It is not going outside. So there is the geographical location in this novel you will find is not the outside world. It is more of an inside world. So there is lots of dealing with the memory of the narrator. So an individual character, and the exploring or the geography that we explore is not the outside world, but an inside world. So in that way, there is a very interesting change that we will pursue in this last novel in this paper, The Only Story. And the tool which will be used here for that journey, or traveling, the tool will be memory. Through memory, we will be going inside one character's past or history, we can say. And then the things will be explored. The only sentiment that it deals with, the only sentiment that is about love, and how the love is pursued in a very young days, and then subsequently as people grow and become old, how they look at love. So how that is changing, that is about this story. The Only Story is about the emotion of love, that in a much younger days, how the people pursue, or protagonist will experience that. And then as he grows into the older life, how love becomes a kind of a responsibility or a kind of a burden also, a kind of a burden or a responsibility, which sometimes becomes very difficult to carry out also, or it becomes a kind of a bondage or a shackle in anybody's life also. So that way, this novel, The Only Story, tries to have a personal exploration. So let us have a student's introductory presentation here, and let us see how we are introduced to this particular novel here. So I would invite one by one the group of students who are going to make presentations there. So today we have this group, Daya, Riddhi, Nidhi, Aditya, and Sneha. They are going to make the presentation as an introduction to this novel. Okay? So you can now come and start.
Hello. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I will share my screen. Shall I start, sir?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Today we are going to present introductory presentation on the text The Only Story by Julian Barnes. And this task is assigned by Dr. Dilip Barad Sir. And we are 5 members in the group: Daya Waghani, Riddhi Bhatt, Nidhi Jethwa, Aditi Wala, and Sneha Agrawat. We are going to deal with these things: introduction, key facts, characters, setting, narrative technique, title, summary, themes, critics' view, official websites, learning outcome, and work cited. And first of all, I would like to start with author's introduction. Julian Barnes was born in 19th January 1946 in Leicester, England. His pen name is Dan Kawang and Edward Page. His occupation is a writer. His genre is novels, short stories, essays, and memoirs. His literary movement is postmodernism. His notable awards are Prix Femina in 1992, Commandant of Lord des Arts et des Letters in 2004, and Barnes has received numerous awards and honors for his writings. Most recently, the David Cohen Prize for Literature in 2011, the 2011 Man Booker Prize, and the 2021 Jerusalem Prize, and the 2021 Yasta Polonian Literary Award. And also in 2021, he was awarded the Jean Bernard Prize, so named in memory of the greatest specialist in the hematology who was a member of the French Academy and chaired the Academy of Medicine. And next we have discussed some works of Julian Barnes. And here we can see some works: The Man in the Red Coat, The Noise of the Time, Keeping an Eye Open, The Sense of an Ending, Elizabeth Finch, and The Only Story. Only Story is a novel by Julian Barnes, and it published in 2018, and it is his 13th novel. According to Heller Calpin, The Only Story is the first of Barnes' books not dedicated to his wife, Pat Kawang, who died in 2008. Significantly, the familiar conundrums Paul contemplates pertain just as readily to bereft morons as to people's signed by romance gone every. It is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all, he wonders. And would you rather love the more and the suffer the more, or love the less and suffer the less? This latter query may be his scourge narrator asserts. Finally, the only real question, but then Barnes admire absolutes evoke words: if you can control it, then it isn't love. I don't know what you call it instead, but it instead the only story is about losing control, but also losing the ability to lose control. And some key facts of the text: title of the text is The Only Story. Author of the text is Julian Barnes. Type of work is novel. Genre of text is a memory novel. It was published in 1st February 2018. The publisher is Jonathan Capt. This text setting in stockbroker belt outside London in 1960s century. The narrator of the text is Robert Paul, and this text is divided in 3 parts. Part 1 is the boy meets woman narrative told in the first person. Part 2, told in a mixture of first and second person, is decline of the love affair. And part 3 is the rest of Paul's life, told mostly in a mix of second and third person. And this text is written in 213 pages. And for further presentation, I would like to call Daya.
Thank you, Aditi. Now let us move ahead with the introduction of the characters. So, we have prepared this chart so we can understand the relation between the characters. First of all, Robert Pohl. So Robert Pohl is the protagonist of the novel The Only Story and the main point of view character of this novel. Much of the novel's narration is framed as Pohl's thought as he reflects upon his life as a whole. At the beginning of the novel, at the beginning of the narrative, Pohl is 19 years old and he is living in suburban town in English in the 1960s. He falls in love with Susan McLeod, that is the second character, and Paul is 19-year-old while Susan McLeod is 48-year-old, and Susan McLeod is the female protagonist of this novel, The Only Story. Then Mr. Gordon McLeod, he is the husband of Susan McLeod, and Jack McLeod is the father of Mr. Gordon. And Susan McLeod and Mr. Gordon has two daughters, Martha and Clara McLeod. Susan McLeod has one best friend. She is John, and his ex-lover of Susan McLeod is Gerald. And John and Gerald are siblings. Then Robert Pohl's university friends are Eric, Barney, Ian, and Sam. And from this, Eric is the best friend of Robert Pohl, and is the later lover or later ex of Robert Pohl. So these are the major character of this novel. Then minor character, Mrs. Dyer, who is maid at Susan's home, Pedro, Christine, and Virginia, with whom Paul's mother tried to have a date with Christina and Virginia. Then Kindy is Paul's ex. Uncle Hums and Aunt Florence. In childhood, Susan went to their house on vacation. Maurice worked at the Reynolds News, and John Bell and Cordinen and Dr. Kenny. Dr. Kenny is Susan's psychiatrist. Then settings of the novel, as Sir has said that this novel is not about much geographical setting, but we have inside setting, though we find some major setting in the novel. The major setting in the novel is London, but the novel is start with the very setting of the village, Stockbroker Belt. The novel opens in the 1960 in suburban English town referred to as the village. This is Paul's hometown, and it is where he first meets Susan McLeod. Susan and Paul carry on a secret relationship for about 2 years. When Paul finishes college, Paul and Susan move to London to live together. Then another setting we can found is a tennis club. Paul and Susan first meet at the local tennis club in the village. They develop an immediate attachment, and Paul often drives Susan between the tennis club and her home. Eventually, this seemingly casual relationship develops into a romance. As their romantic relationship begins to be evident, the tennis club expel both Paul and Susan. Then the McLeod house. After Paul and Susan begins their secret relationship, Paul often spends time at Susan and Gordon's home, that is called as McLeod house. And Gordon is unaware about the relationship between Susan and Paul. Then another setting we can find is Wigmore Street and Henry Road, that is in London. Narrative techniques. So this novel is told through the memory of the Paul. So whole novel is about the remembrance of the Paul's memory and he himself explaining the things. As Aditi has said in key fact, that this novel has 3 parts. Part 1 is about Paul and Susan's meeting, and the whole narration is about the meeting in the memory of through the memory of Paul. And this part is told in the first person. Then part 2 is told in mixture of first, and we can find the mixture of first and second person narrative. And it is about the decline of the love affair. And the third part 3 is the rest of Paul's life told mostly in a mix of second and third person. And at the last of the novel, as Paul says his final goodbye to Susan, now sedated in a psychiatric hospital, he reverts to the first person. So we cannot find any proper technique in this novel. Somewhere we find first person, somewhere second, and somewhere third person. So this is the narrative techniques of the novel. Then now for the title, I would like to call Nidhi.
Thank you, Daya. So, as you know, that this only story has no material available. So, whatever we read, whatever we understood, and from that we give the meaning of the title of this only story. So, when I started the reading of this book, The Only Story, I was surprised that I might know about this, what it is about, which kind of story. I know that it is love story. Then I found this first page, The Only Story. So you can see that the and story is written in a black font, and this only. So it is like it has some tragic and some sorrow, some pain. So it is very significant. Also, the book that front page, and yes, the only story started with a very interesting quote, and which suggests our title too. Okay, that most of us have only one story to tell. I don't mean that only one thing happened to us in our lives, and there are countless events which we turn into countless story, but there is only one that matters, only one final worth telling, and this is mine. So it is about so these only paragraphs can give a brief introduction about the text, like which kind of story it is. Then we know this is the only story of one person, and the person is the Paul. So the title of the story. The only story centered the pained recollection of an again Englishman's life and changing only love. And he recognizes that this failed relationship is the central to his identity and the only story that really matter about him. So this whole story is about the Paul Robert, which tell his story. This story divided in a three part. Somewhere it is a first person, somewhere it is in a second person, and somewhere in a third person. And understood this story, it's a bit hard for us because when you started the reading, then I found myself that in some initial pages you forget what you have read further. So you have to go back to the pages and read again. So it was tough, but title it is very easy to recognize that what kind of story it is, and it is the only story of one particular person named Robert Paul, and it is the life-changing story of him. Now, summary of this only story. So summary is also interesting because the story matters a lot, but the narrative technique matters more a lot. Like a whole story describes that how memory play a very vital role in one person's life, and yeah, especially Robert Paul also fall in the love with a woman who was a 48-year-old. So you can imagine that the age of Robert Paul when story started it was around the 19 age, and the age of Susan was around the 48. So you can imagine the gap, age gap of the both person, that how one person feel in love or that sexual desire toward a old woman. So it is very interesting. I personally analyze the character of that Robert Paul. So I found that it is some kind of our childishness or our immaturity that lead us to do such a things. So let's discuss the story. So summary of the only story. So part one. Part one is very interesting because in this part we came to know about the memory, and yes, also we came to know about that how Robert Paul described himself, and the tennis club is the most important thing where Susan and Paul were met first time. So it is the love story description. In the initial part, we came to know about the description of a time, place, environment, then relationship development of a Susan and Paul, then behavior of a different generation. Okay, through the character of Robert Paul, our author Julian Barnes gave a social milieu of that time. He also discussed some of the current events of that time. And yes, one of the most important thing, as Sir mentioned, that this is a whole story based on the memory, and Robert Paul's memory play a very important role in this novel. I also make a separate books which contain each point of each paragraph, that which kind of story it is and how Robert Paul want to describe this story, and rather tell his story. So in the initial portion, we apart from this and talking about this book, in the initial portion we found that Robert Paul want to say something, But then he denied to tell something, and again he tells same the thing that he don't want to tell. So it is quite confusing. First it is like, I want to tell you something, then I deny to tell you that, and again I'm telling that. So it is that kind of story I found that. And in the initial part we come to know about the relationship. So many character introduction, like Eric. In the first part we made the character like Eric, Barnes, Len, Sam, description of Susan's family and Susan's relationship with his husband. Paul narrated that Susan has known that kind of intimacy, that kind of emotions with his husband from the 2 decades. 2 decades they living in a separate room, and they has a 2 daughter. But the relationship between the daughter and parents were not quite so strong. Then Miss okay, so these Mr. Gordon MacLeod is the husband. Then Miss G and Miss Grimpy, and their actual name is the Martha and Clara, and they both are the daughter of Susan and that Mr. MacLeod. Then part two is part two only discuss the relationship between the Paul and Susan. They went to London, starting living with each other, and what kind of changes come in this relationship. Like Paul had stopped or had abandoned his law study. He had work on some company, and Susan's different behavior. Susan become alcoholic, and also it's a turn toward the tragic end. The second part of the story begins with the information about how Paul and Susan shifted London. From there, how to adjust things. So in the first part, okay, Paul went to the character named John. John is the formal friend of Susan. So he told that now Susan and Paul went to London, and because this setting is a countryside, so everybody knows the relationship, and now they want to go somewhere. So Susan and Paul shifted London. They rented one house and started living with each other. Susan's situation became worse, and she was hospitalized due to over drinking, and there she attack on a nurse, and this kind of trauma we are found in so many times, like due to over drinking, due to over alcoholism. Susan went so many times, created so many things. Police station scene also were there. So because of Susan, now Paul has some kind of trouble in his life, that now he don't want to live with Susan. He started dating someone named Anne. So this chapter is about Susan's madness, Paul's affection toward the Anne, and Anne's attitude toward the Susan. Now Anne is the we can say that we are villain kind of, as well as interesting character, because Anne somewhere create some kind of effect on a Paul about the Susan, that Susan tell that Anne tell to Paul that Susan is not good for you. She is not caring about your dieting, not caring about your study. So this kind of episode we can found in this story, and this part end with this line: but you begin to wonder, not for the first time in your life, if there is someone to be said for feelings less. And now this third part. So part is very interesting. It's unfold each and every characters, each and every events, and what was very mysterious in this in that both part. The third part reveal each and everything. So third part, somewhere is the second person narration, somewhere third person, and at the end we can found that Paul himself told the story. So now Paul has different vision to looking at the sex, as we know that the novel major talk about the theme of memory. At the second page, narrator reveals the role of a memory, and now Paul is around the 29-year-old. So this journey, like a 10-year journey, create so many change in the character of a Paul. Now he is a mature, he understands the relationship, the definition of a love from that Paul's vision is totally different. He noted out the relationship or definition or quote from the love. He created his own thinking toward love, and now he realized that relationship with Susan was one kind of disaster in his life. and most of things belong to Paul's diary entries. So this chapter mostly talk about how Paul's entries in a diary, and this part opens about every character, like what might happen with the other character like Mr. McLeod and his dad. So we also come to know that who is the John. John was the former friend of that Susan. His only lady, 53-year-old. Then he's way to looking to life, way to looking to love. What happened, what might happen with Mr. McLeod? Like after departure of Paul and Susan to London, he become very lonely. Now the McLeod house carry only servants and Mr. McLeod. Then one day he also become very alcoholic, and one day on a bed he found dead by one servant. Then two daughters, Clara and Martha. Paul wrote a letter to Clara and Martha both that to come and bring your mother because I'm not able to carry him. Like now she was for me like a burden. What should I do with him? It's like a burden for me. So first Clara denied, then Martha came and took her mother with her. So this kind of thing, and it has a very tragic end that we found that Susan is hospitalized, and Paul went there. So forced to abandon law, Paul has become an office manager. He never has another serious relationship or children. He eventually settled in a rural village where he runs the Forgrove Valley Art Station Cheese Company and bakes, and still energized by memory of a Gordon, and he distribute and despise a man. And the ending part is very interesting, and here is the hidden mystery unfolded by the narrator, and we come to know that what had happened with Susan and the condition of a Paul. So this entire story talk about the theme of love, memory, and loss. And yes, the character development of Paul is very interesting. There's one decade, or we can say 10 years, bring us so many changes in his character. So the story ends with the death of Susan. For the theme, I would like to call Daya.
Thank you, Nidhi. It was very difficult to me to find themes in this novel because we are already habituated to find novel ready to find any theme of the any text from the material website or any website. So it was very difficult to me. I found that these four themes are major in this novel: themes of memory, theme of love, loss, and self-delusion, pain and fulfillment, and history versus memory. First is theme of memory. So the whole story is about the memory of Paul. So the theme of memory is the major theme in this novel, and we can find the weaknesses of memory and imperfection of memory in this novel through the characters of Paul. Because sometimes he is not uh, he is not true about his own memory, because he talk about the past and present, and that are not relevant in this memory. Narrative tries to give effect of the fragmented memory. He talk about the past, and then the previous year, then again talk about the past. So whole memory are fragmented in this novel. Paul often forget that Suzanne has two children at the end of the novel, and in his mind she is to be rescued from the mothering, which he sees as rising social acceptance combined with the slow emotional diminution. So we can say that Paul, he himself not aware about his own memory. So the theme of memory is here found as the weakness of the novel. As Paul himself said about the memory is that I think there is a different authenticity to memory and not an inferior one. Memory sorts and shifts according to the demands made on it by the rememberer. Then another novel is about theme of love, loss, and self-delusion. Because Paul's love with Suzanne is very interesting, because Paul is of 19-year-old while Suzanne is of 48-year-old. So we can find the age difference between these both character, and because of that he lost, perhaps he lost her love. He means Paul is a 19-year-old university student, while Susan is 48-year-old, and a mother of two daughters in London, suburban stockbroker Belt, sometimes in 1960s. I think here is the mistake. 1960s. Their love was by its very nature disruptive, catalytic, but then it is were not. It may not have been love, would it have? The only story, according to the review of Kirkus on the book of the only story explores theme of first love, loss, and self-delusion. It also paints a portrait of a generations. Barnes' own, whose ideals have floundered over the course of the 20th century and early 21st century. The novel was generally well received by critics who found it a somber but well conceived. We can find many quote about the love in this novel. So I have mentioned 5 quotes from there. Then the theme of pain and fulfillment. In the story's examination of the various contradictions and challenges inherent within the concept of love, the narrative seeks to utilize Paul and Susan's relationship as demonstrating how to fulfillment and suffering are not only inevitable in a romantic relationship, but are also often simultaneously phenomena. The narrative first introduced this idea by the opening of the novel as follows: would you rather love would you rather love the more and suffer the more, or love the less and suffer the less? In this way, the narrative immediately draws a thematic connection between the fulfillment and the suffering of the Paul that underlies the story of Susan and Paul's relationship. At first, the narrative highlights the passion and complete fulfillment that Paul experiences in the early stages of the relationship with Susan. He says that I was 19 and I knew that love was incorruptible, proof against time and tarnish. Then a theme of history versus memory. We can find the personal history of the Paul in this novel. And through this history, he is telling the story, and story is moving ahead. With criticizing memory, the novel also questions the history. One of the central idea the novel pointed is unreliability of history, because I will give some quotation in this in my learning outcome about the unreliability of the history. And in this novel, we can find personal history of Paul, and what we believe history as truth is unreliable, because without documenting anything, we cannot able to rely on that things. Now, for critics' view, I would like to call Riddhi.
Yes, so I am presenting critics' view. So first critic view is from the Guardian, Kat Clancy, and she said that the only story and XY quest look at love. Our Paul's shoulder, we glimpse other kind of love, less romantic, more commonplace, but also more generative. So all this means that the XY quest movement, and there are many in the story, in the only story, come from its psychological equity, especially about how we remember in Paul's narrative experiences deconstruct themselves and personalities decay in a deventingly vast and alluring, rich, patent present, full of ironic turns of speech from which we infer great intelligence. But she becomes reduced by the middle of the book to a series of repetitive tropes, while even her nickname, a vital part of her charm, are reduced to verbal tics. Mr. EP for the man who hits her, Mr. Badger for Paul. She carries on asking a desperate question until we not just Paul, wonder if we ever know her at all. Then there is a second review from the Washington Post by Ron Charles. So he said that if a Flaubert reimagined Cougar Town, this is the novel we might get. So their relationship sounds scandalous, Cougar Town reimagined by Flaubert. But Paul is quick to such a titillation that you might think a French novel, older woman teaching the art of love to younger men. But there was nothing French about our relationship or about us. We were English and so had only those morally laden English words to deal with, words like scarlet woman and adulteress. So he said that the very Englishness of their affairs lends the whole encounter an extra layer of tweety oddness. Barnes emphasized that Paul's erotic adventure takes place in a suburb of London in the 1960s, a realm that not only represses sexual behavior but even the terms of censor. There is a stainless to these themes that's only partially by Barnes' elegant style, the way an expensive uh, clone might distract us for a time from the mustiness of a well-appointed sitting room. Indeed, despite its brevity, there is something claustrophobic about the only story. Then third review from the Hindu, Vanki Vembu, he said about that a haunting narrative of an audacious love and a distant memory of it mapped over decades. So in the only story, Julian Barnes, arguably one of fiction's most elegious cartographers of the heart and of the human condition, returns to his first love, the metroland of his debut novel, with a haunting narrative of an audacious love and a distant memory of it mapped over decades. Barnes, working with the clinical precision of a cardiac surgeon, lays open the affair of their heart with a wrenching narrative that, even when it doesn't quick validate the redemptive power of love, is curiously therapeutic. He also said that the only story that everyone has their love story. Suzanne once tells Pauls, but it may have been a fiasco. It may have fizzled out. It may never even have got going. It may have been all in the mind, but it's their story. She says it's the only story. This then is Paul and Suzanne's story. Then last and fourth review from NPR by Heller, beautiful but heart-rending. The only story looks back at love gone wrong. The only story is about losing control, but also losing the ability to lose control. The only story is about looking back on a life and trying to make sense of what happened. It's heavier, less suspenseful read with a focus on the love rather than death. It's also far more interior and a tormented tale, so that even its narrator feels the need to step back from it, retreating from the first person I to the second person you, and finally even further to the third person he. Barnes explains this narrative self-withdrawal rather bluntly. Nowadays, the raucousness of the first person within him was stilled. It was as if he viewed and lived his life in the third person, which allowed him to assess it more accurately, he believed. Then official website of the author. So yes, this is the official website of the Julian Barnes. Here you find there are all the books, Elizabethan Finch, then The Man in the Red Coat, The Only Story, and you can search more thing about The Only Story. Then Julian Barnes' biography, resources, and if you want to contact them, so you can also. Now for a learning outcome, I would like to call Aditi. Please come here and share your learning outcome here.
From these presentations, I have experienced very good, and I have learned so many things about the presentation, like to how to adjust images, GIF and map, and also fonts and fonts colors, and how to manage presentation slides and their background and everything, and how to work in group at digital platform and many other things. And for next learning outcome, I would like to call the
Yes, I have read the novel, The Only Story, and from that I found these are things. Age difference in love. We can find the age difference in love between Paul and Susan. Because Paul is a 19-year-old and Susan is 48-year-old. So how it creates the problem in our life if we sometimes we cannot understand our lover or our partner. So age difference affect a lot, then patient to achieve something. So in this novel we can find that Susan is when Paul first met Susan at tennis club. At that time Susan was 48-year-old, and still she is playing tennis. So from that I have learned that if we have a hobby or we have a passion to do something, our age doesn't matter to it. So passion to achieve something, that is the major point. Then don't rely on memory. So I was talking about this quote, and other many quotes we found in this novel that are about the unreliability of the memory. Paul says that I don't remember when we first kissed. Isn't that odd? I can remember 6 or 2, 7 or 5, 2 or 6. I can remember that old driver's ears in foul detail. But I can't remember when or where we first kissed, or who made the first move, or whether it was both of us at the same time, and whether perhaps it was not so much a move as a drift. Was it in the car or in her house? Was it morning, noon, or night? And what was the weather like? Well, you certainly won't expect me to remember that. So, from that, we can find that he himself is not sure about his memory, and many other uh, quotation about the weather and colors we find in this novel. So from that I learned that keep documenting, as sir also says some many times, that keep documenting everything. If we have a record of that things, that is no question of forget about the memories. Then last is reading of original novel. So it is a very this novel is contemporary, so we can't find any other material about it to understand, or we can't find any study guide about it. So it is very difficult to read the original novel, because in one page we can find 10 to 15 words, that vocabulary that we don't know about their that meaning or etymology. So it is very difficult. And if I talk about the process of a group task, so it is it was very good experience for me to work with all these my work group members, and we all had collectively done this presentation very effectively. And further learning my outcome, I would like to call Nidhi.
Thank you, Daya. So as we know that it is a group task, and working with group is somewhere tough, somewhere very easy, because each and every member's mentality. But we are so lucky because we are all hardworking and we did a very good work. So I'm talking about my learning out. So it is initially that book, that copy is the only copy. So they had told me that I want that original text. So I said, okay, take it. And then I started the ePDF. So I'm sharing my screen here, that in the which way I have started the reading. In the initial 7th or 8th page, I read it 15 or 16 times, because whenever I start reading, I forget what he actually want to tell that. So, and with this, and sir's logic also helped me to create so many things, write down so many things. So sir once opened that Excel sheet. So I prepared one Excel sheet. So some hard terms, some references, character list, places, which is very hard to understand me, that it is the character list, that these kind of character are there. Then hard term for understand me, that Hugo's and Caroline, what was that, the tennis wife, the 2.4 children, then clever clog and Harold professor. Then Maurice Minor is very, I found very interesting, that I was no, I have no idea about that. What was that? And I googled it out, and I found that we have that taxi. If you know about it, let me show you. Mm. And yes, I also prepare the docs for material. So it will be easy for us, because if we are working with notes, with notebook, we also have to do this digital work. So I also preparing text only here. This the only story. So whenever when I started first, I also wrote about this Julian Barnes, then about only story. I found I try to found more and more articles about it. Then key facts, it is done by me after completing the whole book, because it is very tough, because there is no anything about only story beside these 3 or 4 reviews. Then also some famous dialogue of main character. And yes, and these yes, I also divided the 3 part, and some of the most beautiful quotes from the that 3 parts. I also try to preparing a summary, but later on my mind was tube lighted, and I found that Google Keep is very good to note down some key facts. So hard terms, I'm talking about that car. So this car was mentioned in the book, and it's very interesting for me, that I have an idea about that car, and I was thinking that what was that Maurice Minor. So it create a good habit to me to how to read e-text, and with the help of e-text, we can, and with help of, especially if you have a laptop, you can do a multitasking, like one side I was reading the novel, and highlighted the thing, that which kind of thing is very interesting. Then another side I was keeping this chart, and another side I was writing a memory, try to capture the kind of things, like short in a short sentence I was trying to summarize the whole things. So I prepared this Google in a Google Keep, that it helped me to understand each and everything, and especially most of the contemporary events. And it divided in a 3 part, and it carries the 3 part summary. So it's and another thing is that working with digital text help a lot to you, like with the highlightation, you have also the comment box. So at the middle of the this book, I found that the comment box is very easy than putting down notes another way. So for example, I'm searching one comment box, like yes, then I also mentioned the various event in this e-text. Let me find. So these kind of colors, like it is hard for me to understand what it actually means. So I colored it pink. Then some of the interesting thing, I colored it yellow. In hard copy, it is tough, because there is no that much kind of space, and we cannot write so many things at there. And comment box. Yeah, like these kind of arrows. Now it is the Malta story. What is the Malta story? Then here the Paul talk about the various kind of sex. Then that part ends here. This initial conversation is entire conversation is very important. I'm searching for one comment box so I can show you how I do that. The entire process is very interesting because, yeah, like the way Susan Lowe Paul, you can do so many things with it, like Paul's diary entries. So it is easy for us. Paul's situation and how now he started the living on a different life with him. So with this help and yes, for clicking here on highlight, you found that add comment, so you can write down here like what kind of sentence are telling about this. So I'm not able to searching right now comment box because I put a very less comment box, but if I'm searching I try to it. If. So yes, working with digital tools and e-texts have become very easy for us, and now I'm learning, and still I can say that it is very good rather than reading a hard copy. So it become very easy for us to understand so many things. We can quickly Google it out what it is means. Dictionary also open there. So this learning outcome about like how digital text help us to reading this kind of bulky text. Like I also draw the lines. So yes, it's my learning outcome. And one another thing is that I also learned that how to prepare a chart because I don't know how to prepare a diagram or a chart in a PPT. So they had told me that you have to do this, and I told you, "Arey, marathi nahi thai. Why are you not understanding?" So you tell me that you have to do this, and finally I learned so many things in editing. I rarely I edit so many things, and you all might know that my PPT was so bad in the manner of these kind of presentation and all these things. So these new things I have learned in how to create very sharp presentation, and oftentimes she told me that justify your paragraphs, justify your paragraphs, justify your paragraphs. So these kind of habit now developed in myself. And most important thing that I was thinking that it is hard to read e-PDF and entirely PDF, but with the help of only story and with this group I can do this, and I learned that working with e-text is very easy rather than working with a hard copy. So thank you. Now I would like to call Riddhi for further.
Yes, thank you, Nidhi. So, first of all, this novel is very difficult to read because it is a memory based novel, and it was quite difficult for me to read and understand these all things like Paul's memory and character of Suzanne and all things. And as Daya mentioned, that keep documenting. So, this one thing I learn that keep all the notes and documenting all the things. And one thing which happened with me, that when I was editing this slide and all things, so my laptop charger was dead so and some issues in my laptop, so I edit all the slides in the mobile phone. So there were many issues I had faced while working on mobile. And yes, about group task, so it was a very great experience with all these member, and quite challenging because this uh, and thank you. Then these are work cited, and if you have any queries, suggestions, questions, so you can contact us. Thank you. And now I would like to call sir, please come here and give a suggestion and further discussion.